Frank. Can you hear us? Can you, Frank?
Yeah, I can see 4 boxes, but I don't see any images. I can now.
How are you doing, Frank? How's the beginning of the year been for you?
Fine, weather's reasonable. So you out of the country?
I'm in California. Here's the Pacific Ocean.
Okay. Are you near any fire zones or anything?
No, I'm near San Francisco. It's very green. It's been raining apparently here quite a lot earlier in the year, so it's very green here and wet, or damp at least.
Okay, good stuff.
Okay, so I think we can get started. Yeah, welcome everyone to the first episode of our flagship power workshop series, Microfluidic and Business. And thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Anne. I'll be the coordinator, basically reading questions from our attendees to the speaker. And before we get started, I'd like to run through just some housekeeping items. First, I think you already heard it. This is a recorded session, and we've received some questions from the attendees on their registration form, and we will start with those questions first. And during the workshop, you can continue to send in more questions to the speaker by typing them in the Q&A chat box. And later, in the later half of the workshop, we'll be selecting questions from the Q&A, and we invite the person who asked the question to speak directly with our speaker. Please make sure if we ask you to speak up, turn on your microphone and make sure you are in a setting with minimum background noise. And if possible, please turn on your camera as well, because we want to have a more interactive experience for the speakers and also for the audience today. Yes, so that's it for my part. Now, without further ado, let's get started. And I'm glad to welcome Mark Gilligan, founder and CEO of Flagship Power, and Frank Craig, chairman of Biochannel Partners, to join us today as our speaker for the first episodes of the series titled Avoiding Common Pitfalls for Microfluidic Startups. Welcome, Mark and Frank. Okay, so now the stage is yours. Could you please introduce yourself?
Go first, Frank.
Yeah, I'm Frank Craig. So I'm a bioscientist by background. I've probably been doing life sciences for about 40 years, I hate to say, but I've done about 5 startups, both in California and Cambridge, and I've done everything. So raised money, defined products, built teams, not always brilliantly smoothly, but that's perhaps what we're here today to learn from some pitfalls or pick up some tips.
Yeah, so I'm Mark Gilligan. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Black Sheep Power, which has its group company in the UK, but has a significant team in Vietnam, in Hanoi. But I have, over the last 35 years, been working originally as an aerospace engineer in a number of different industries, but then moved into life sciences about 28 years ago, and have been working in life sciences since then, having pioneered use of microfluidics in a variety of different arenas, starting with the creation of the field of flow chemistry together with a variety of leading chemists in the world, and then also using microfluidics subsequently in a variety of other industries and producing products and selling them and marketing them all over the world. I am based between the UK, Vietnam and California.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, one other thing I should mention is I have worked in microfluidics technologies for about the last 15 years, mainly for drug discovery. Before that, I did other sort of drug discovery type companies. So a bit like Mark, but not as much. I do have a strong microfluidics stroke business background.
Yes, that's great to hear all your experiences. I think the audience today will benefit a lot from your experiences. So I have my first question. When did you start your company? And at that time, was it a microfluidic company?
Frank, do you want to go first? I guess on Sphere is probably the most relevant company to talk about.
Yeah, I did do my first company about 30 years ago, but that was last century. So Sphere Fluidics, I'll talk about that, is a company I formed in Cambridge, UK. It was formed about 15 years ago. Sort of I felt like doing a new company. I'm quite a technology guy, so I was quite excited about technology. There was a couple of professors involved in the early stages. I liked their characters, were very smart people. The struggle we had, I think, was positioning what was a very exciting science into useful areas. But it was sort of me being ready to do a company, being opportunistic, finding a technology that had potential, and then cooking up from there. So that's how it all happened. Challenges in the early days, mainly finding the right market. I think the professors wanted to do one market, which was biofuels. I thought drug discovery, sort of genome editing, etc., was a more interesting field. So there was a bit of debate about where to position this thing. But we did get through that. I mean, they ended up listening to me, who had more industrial experience. But as per usual, it's usually business focus is your challenge in the first year or two, plus raising cash.
So yes, I'll talk about a group of companies that ended up being called Black Trace. That company I founded in 2001, and originally it was called Cirrus, and it was focused entirely on using microfluidics in chemical synthesis in drug discovery. And that evolution of activities led to our first product being launched to address chemical drug discovery, some small molecule drug discovery, and also process development in 2004, having evolved that together with our partners at GSK and Pfizer. And when we started selling products, then it became clear that it was difficult to sell a breakthrough product into a market which was quite conservative. So it took some years for the sales momentum to build up. So in parallel, we needed to find other ways to generate revenues to bolster the business, and we ended up going back to slightly more traditional technologies that we developed products in alongside our microfluidic reactors, which became a field that was called flow chemistry. And I coined the term together with the team, and we wrote the Wikipedia page that defined the term in 2006, having been trying to use different terminology to explain the technology people. And in the early days, we also had 9/11 happened about 6 weeks after I incorporated the company. And so it was kind of created somewhat delay in the various different funding discussions that were happening. So we started with rather a lot of consulting style business activity to develop products for other people for the first couple of years of the company's existence, just to generate enough revenue to pay salaries and keep going. Simplistically, we launched over 10 products in the first two and a half years of the company's existence, but branded by other people and sold by them in parallel with our own R&D activities.
Yeah, I can see that innovations take some time to pick up, and you have to be quite creative about the offering that you bring to the table. So we have one question here from the audience, that what was the most critical time or decision you have to make, or a startup in general needed to make during the product development and commercialization?
And I can comment on that. So, and I've always had a good sort of vision on the future. So when you talk about drug discovery, especially from a cell biology perspective, I could see these things emerging as, sort of genome editing, cell therapy, synthetic biology. However, the biggest cell-based market was actually biopharmaceuticals. And while I was tempted to go for emerging, exciting markets, the investors sort of said, default on something you can sell into in the short term, which was still about a £7 billion per annum market. Now, later, when I talked to venture capitalists, they said that was the right move because there's such a lot of new companies in those areas. They can't tell which company will be the leader. You're always better to pick an existing growing market rather than a potential rapid growing market, or at least transition from one to the other. But pick the easy one to start with. Don't pick the risky one. So that was the sort of lesson we learned. Then we defined the products around the biopharmaceuticals market, and that became more successful.
Yeah, I think that.
What do you think about that, Mark?
Yeah, so I think that a significant crux moment in the business history of mine was around 2005 or so, when we'd been trying to sell our flow chemistry microfluidic reactor products in the market for about a year. And it was apparent that, okay, there was a significant interest and people would have lots of discussion with us, and you might get 30 people coming to a meeting because they were very interested, but there was very little proof evidence to demonstrate that it would actually work, other than theoretical work that we and some practice that we had done. And therefore there was hesitation to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to have a go, basically, from their point of view, while they were all very comfortable with batch reactors of various kinds, traditional glassware that they were using in the chemical labs and the organic synthesis labs. So we made a very bold decision, really. As a company that was trying to do things in completely new ways, we decided to look at the marketplace for the traditional reactor products and try to re-envision how to make those products better, because we could feel that that was going to make a difference to our ability to sell products more easily. And so we ended up developing a set of batch reactor products which were very interesting to the market in various ways. If we wanted to arrange a meeting just about batch reactors, maybe 2 people would come to the meeting, because it was sort of what they were doing already, so it wouldn't catalyze a lot of interest. And then they might buy something. But the reality is that when we organized a meeting on the flow chemistry and the micro reactors, you might get 30 people coming to the meeting, but then they wouldn't buy anything because it well, not necessarily wouldn't, but it would be delayed, because it didn't really it was very scientifically interesting, but it wasn't clear to them how they could benefit from using it immediately without feeling like they were taking a risk. So when we ended up with both the flow chemistry and the batch chemistry products together, what it enabled us to do was we'd arrange a meeting about the flow chemistry. We'd get 30 people in the room, but then while we had their attention, we would also show them our batch reactor products. And what happened was it meant that we created a significant momentum in our sales in the sort of early years of the company's history, which ended up being generated from the batch products, the traditional products, just because we managed to capture an audience using the new technology microfluidic reactors. And then gradually what happened was that the microfluidic reactor market became more established over some years, so that by 2010 or so, then actually there was a lot of momentum, to the point where it was about 50-50 in terms of sales of batch and flow products. But it was a critical decision at that time to decide to develop some more traditional products alongside the slightly more radical products. And that was, yeah, it was an interesting decision-making process to choose to do that at the time in 2005 or so.
Yeah, funnily enough, Mark, we found the same. So I remember bringing in GlaxoSmithKline, MedImmune, Pfizer, would show them what we're doing. They say, fantastic. But none of them wanted to commit due to the technical risk, because what we had was something which was a bit academic lab-based. And most of them said to us, can't you have a plug-and-play machine? We press a button, it does it. So we're fortunate. I would talk to everyone in the company. We talked to a sort of leading US biotech who was more sort of risk positive. They were very keen on it, and they bankrolled us to develop that into the first industrial version. Without that early partnership, we'd probably still be talking to some of the big companies. So the big companies have all the cash, but they're very slow because they're very risk averse, and they're worried about can this young company deliver this leading edge product, which is all robust and wonderful. That's what we want. Science is fantastic, but a product is a very different sort of entity from a sort of scientific proof of concept. So I found roughly the same experience you had of excitement, skepticism, conservatism, until eventually you get enough data, and you get enough sort of industrial sort of know-how into the company that the big companies say, that's fantastic, we'll now buy it. So it's the same sort of experience you had.
I think another related point, actually, just quickly before we spend too much time on this question, is that initially, because of my personal history, had all been with industry, I didn't have any connection to academia, and we didn't put any effort into talking to academics, because actually at the time I perceived that the academics wouldn't be able to afford to buy our products. So therefore we spent all our time talking to industry, but slowly we started building up academic relationships, and the academics clearly were focused to publish papers, and once the academics were publishing more papers, it created a lot more proof statements, so that the industrial partners or industrial potential customers would be much more willing to believe, oh, it's possible because this paper says so, and here's the chemistry that demonstrated. So I think that having the right balance of industrial and academic customers or partners is quite useful and valuable to the company in its early stages.
Thank you, Mark and Frank. I think I can pick up some common patterns in your answers, like perhaps together with an innovative product, also think about a traditional product. But Mark, I want to go deeper into something you've mentioned. You said that it's a quite interesting process to making that decision. Do you still remember what factor that influenced that decision? And then the next question, I mean, just want to bring it up now, is about like market research. So both of you touch on talking to different people, partners, not just industry partners, but also academics. Was there a systematic market research that you have done, or startups now when they get started? How would you advise them to approach that?
I think, first of all, in terms of the decision-making process, I think that it was when you've got a business plan and you've decided you're doing something, to decide to do something different to what you said you were doing is quite hard. We had investment from GlaxoSmithKline, and they were very hands-off. So we didn't have any external investors trying to control and tell us what to do. But at the same time, it was clear that the sales momentum, we could get meetings and do presentations, but the sales momentum was behind where it needed to be. And we needed to do something about that. And we couldn't just sort of like push the customers to buy faster. So we had to do something alongside what we were doing to generate revenue. So it was off track from what we'd originally planned to do. But once we conceived of a product which was clearly going to fit the market understanding of how to do things today easily, and we thought was really interesting and different to what existed already, then we committed ourselves to developing that product and then beginning that process. But the process was a sort of a discussion between 2 or 3 people and internally in the company, and almost navel gazing about what are we doing and why are we doing it. It probably took a month or so to discuss the topic and say, okay, we're going to now develop this other product as well. Coming back to talking to the customer audience about things and doing market surveys, in my experience, I've found that if you've got an iPhone and everybody knows what an iPhone is, and you say, what would you like for the next generation of the iPhone? People already understand what they're talking about in the product, and therefore they'll have very specific criticisms of that product, which they'd like. They'd like longer battery life. I'd like it if the battery lasted longer. I'd like it if the camera was a bit better, for example, or something highly specific like that. And therefore, you can be fairly sure if you make the phone have the next iteration have a longer battery life, most customers will probably like that, especially if you've got statistical evidence to demonstrate that by having a lot of people have told you this. The problem when you're making a very new disruptive product, because I'm talking about Apple, I think that the interesting example is when Steve Jobs first showed an iPad. He showed an iPad at one of the Apple events, and everybody was sort of excited, but didn't know what it was for. And they didn't know whether people would buy it because it wasn't clear as a use case scenario what and why you would have one. But it was a product that Apple had developed with their own self-confidence. The market hadn't told them anybody wanted an iPad. They decided themselves that they should develop that product and that there would be a market for it. And I think that when you're developing disruptive products into space where there isn't an existing product, there's a level to which you can ask customers. But I've personally got experience where you talk to customers about something and they say they would really like the thing you're talking about, and then they don't buy it. And it's like, well, but we made the thing you said you wanted, and then you didn't buy it. So why is that? It's like, oh, well, I didn't quite understand. So I thought I'd want it, but when I saw it, I didn't want it after all. The other time also, I've had feedback from customers saying, no, I wouldn't want that. And then the company has decided, we really think that this is useful to the customer base. And then you develop it and go on to sell a lot of it. So I'm not saying that market research isn't important. It's more that you need to ask the right questions and you need to understand how much the customer is able to understand the question you're asking them if they haven't seen the kind of thing you're talking about before. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think it's quite important to get it right. What we tended to do is we had a blend of internal experience, but we weren't experts in all the applications and the biopharmaceutical industry. So we ended up, and also when we were raising the venture capital at the time, they like to see objective external reports. So if we said to them the market size is this, you actually back it up with that was published by Reuters 2024 in this report. So we ended up using a bunch of purchased external supposed objective reports, industry reports. We also had a consultant who did a fantastic job of interviewing about 30 academics and industrial users based across the world, but mainly in Europe and the US. And he did try to keep the questions somewhat clear, because Mark's right, you can't confuse customers. So you sort of say, we have a technology that does this. What of these features is important to you? Throughput, cost, speed. He then asked about price sensitivity. He asked about applications and insight. What's missing? Can you rank these things? Now, what came out of that was very interesting, because he discovered certain features that we didn't even know were useful, and no other company had these features. So we ended up with the product defined by the customer. It had some of the features we thought were useful, but it had other features that customers overall were in consensus that was very useful. But Mark's also right. You'll get 80-20. You can build this thing, you go back to certain customers and go, oh, I don't like the software. I don't like the cutter. So you can't keep all of them happy all the time. But I do think you have to talk to external customers, because too many sort of startup companies make the mistake of they build what in-house engineering team wants, but that isn't what the customer needs. So you have to sort of blend both sides and come up with something which keeps most of the market happy, but perhaps not all of it.
I see that's the balance that companies need to try and keep it. Yeah, so our next question is also a little bit related to that. Besides the product, besides the innovation, there are many other factors that can first significantly differentiate a startup product and offering, and also influence their sales and performance. So with your experience, what are the factors that you would advise for startup to really focus on, or at least touch on? And how can they effectively leverage those factors besides innovation?
I think for a startup in the early phases, there are actually two audiences. One is the audience you're going to sell your product to, and the other audience is your investor base, your prospective investor base. So without investment, a technology-based startup can't begin. You can't start up, or at least you need some investment from somewhere to be able to start up. And you can bootstrap, and you can do things in light touch ways, spending as little money as possible, but you still need some money. So you have to decide what money you're going to get from where, and depending on how much you need. The reason I say that is because the stuff that you're talking about to do with what the product is and what the market is and what the product market fit is like is not quite the same in terms of what suits the audience you want to sell the product to, as compared to what suits the market possibility that the investor base is interested in. So when you're selling a very specific product to a very specific customer, then it's quite clear, this product has a set of capabilities, and this customer does or doesn't need those, or will value those in this way or that way. And that's a useful specific conversation. But if you want to raise investment, you have to make sure that the proposition you're suggesting around what your startup's going to do and how it's going to be successful actually fits into the climate of investment at that time, in terms of what the investment market feels is the subject space that they should be investing in. So you could have a lovely invention in I guess in genomics or something, but at a time when people don't really believe genomic science is going to be that important, and then it won't get invested in. At another point in time, you could have an investment in genomics, and everybody thinks it's the most important thing to invest in. So, and it's the same for every given topic area, and that's usually based on market sentiment to do with specifics of what other companies are doing successfully or not, as well as general market sentiment of the overall economic climate. So the point I'm making is there are two audiences in the early days. Later on, once you've actually managed to get to the point you're profitable, really you just need to focus on your sales and commercial performance, because any investor will just be interested in the financials at that point. But in the early days, your general suggestion of what you're doing and why you're doing it makes a lot of difference. Does that echo anything you're thinking about, Frank?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think with investors having a very clear proposition, what they probably don't want are slides or presentations that are over technical. You have to have a balanced commercial element, financial, a bit about the management team. So you have to sort of get the message through within about 5 minutes. I think also what we found is, especially with customers, when you have brand new products, there's a skepticism about product robustness. The first question every potential customer asks us is, do you have service and support in this region? So if you don't have that in the States, you better get something fast, because a US company is unlikely to buy it from a UK company because they worry about what if the machine goes down, how long will it take to get fixed. So I think another way to differentiate yourself isn't just innovative science engineering. It can be high quality products, robust products, fantastic customer service, fantastic repair options. So customers go, yeah, that's really good, I like it, because I talked to another company, they don't have service and support, oh, they're very flaky, you guys look very professional, I like it. And that gives the customer a lot of confidence. So I think there's the similarity in the themes there is investor confidence, customer confidence, and some of it is communication backed up with systems. Innovation is good, but a lot of companies can be innovative. I think you have to go beyond innovation to other features such as the team, the message, the support.
No, I agree. I definitely agree with that. Selling is a complex subject space and it's not just about technical features. Yeah, and there's another thing also, which I think around the sales part of the process, which is quite important in certain markets, is that frequently a younger startup will have a price and just assume that's what the customers are going to pay if they buy it. But frequently there'll be, in some markets especially, there'll be an expectation that there'll be able to be a discussion about the price and discounts given, when actually if the startup has set the price with the assumption that is the price and there isn't any scope for discounting really without getting to the point where the product's not making enough money, then it actually can set the wrong feeling, because everybody likes to feel they got a deal. And if you actually don't have any scope for discounting, then some markets will simply feel that you're not a flexible company. They don't want to work with you because you're not willing to discuss price with them. So it's just one example of a very specific subject space. But I think there are lots of areas where a younger startup won't have familiarity with how to deal with that, or realize that there's so much complexity in the buying process beyond whether the product's good.
Thank you, Mark and Frank. So what I hear here is that there are two audience that you need to serve, the investors and the customers, and each of them care about different things and not just the technical specs of the product. But I also see that, I don't know, my interpretation, investor, do they tend to look for a bigger picture, like a vision for a company, while for customer, they have more specific requests, like just some short-term goals for the organization to deliver this and that. So there are two things there that you need to hit at the same time. Do you think?
I think you're right. I mean, the customers probably do care more about the specifics of the product and what it can do for them. They will care, as Frank says, about the surrounding quality of the business they're talking to, how well they'll be supported and looked after once they become a customer, and whether that there will be a doubt in the mind of the customer. If it's a little startup, will you exist in a year's time when I want to keep buying my consumables for this product? So startup failure rates are not insignificant, and therefore buying from a startup from a big corporate feels a little bit risky at times. While the investors will have a higher level vision, they'll want to feel perhaps that there's more than one shot on goal, in that if this particular product, the first generation product, doesn't quite work out in the marketplace, that there are some other ideas or other products in development that could come further beyond that. So if the first shot on goal misses, then there can be other shots on goal later, and it'll be a higher level picture of things. I think that's definitely true, Ryan.
I think also what investors will do is, depending on your product, so we are building a product which was fairly complex, desk-based survey system. The product development took 3 years, which is very typical. So we had to communicate that with investors. If you give us money, we'll build this product over 3 years. We'll start to sell it in end of year 3, year 4. But you have to bear with us. We'll give you a deliverable every year, 1 year, 2 year, 3. So they monitor progress. We also talk to potential customers. One thing investors can't do, which I find frustrating, is we came out with a lovely spec and they would go, well, actually, couldn't you do it cheaper? Couldn't you take that feature out? And I think looking back, I probably say, don't do it, because what they did with us is, for example, we had a system, we wanted to put 4 lasers into it. They went, that sounds expensive. Couldn't you do a 1 laser system? And as Mark sort of hinted at, you do the 1 laser system because it's a bit faster, saves, £25 or something. So you build a 1 laser system, you sell it. Of course, customers then say, couldn't we have a 4 laser system? And then you think, why didn't just stick with the 4 laser system? The technical team had it right, but we had to sort of contort ourselves to keep investors happy. So in that situation, I went back and I think I should probably have defended that decision a bit more with investors. But sometimes you just say, yes, give us the cash, it's still progress, let's move forward. So investors can't look to some short-term goals as prototypes or proof of concepts, but they don't want to do that forever. They'll do it for a couple of years, but they then want to see products coming out, depending on the products and stuff. So customers are more used to short-term things. Investors do tend to, at the end of the day, think of product sales as finance.
I mean, I think that's the other point, I think, which is valid. An investor does have a bit more patience than a customer. So if you have a discussion with an investor and you say this is going to take a year, they are investing money in the company and they accept that it takes time. If you talk to a customer and they say, can I buy this product? And we say, well, it doesn't really exist yet, but we could make it for you. And they say, okay, how long will that take? A year? Then they will say, no, well, I don't want to wait a year for it. It doesn't feel very real to me at that point. So it's a different motivation and driver. So the customer needs to see something kind of done, whereas an investor is willing to believe in something that hasn't been done yet.
Thank you. So we'll touch a little bit on the product and then on the customer, supporting the customer, and also how to navigate the relationship with the investor. The next question is about the people who make that happen. Do you have any advices for the startup regarding building a strong, efficient team and coherent process?
Go first, Frank.
Yeah, people, at the end of the day, investors look at a company, they look for 4 things. The number one thing is the management team. Then they look at market, return investment, products, etc. The people are what drive the business. So in my experience, the best thing you can do is put in place a very robust recruitment process where you don't just meet people and say, yeah, you come and work for us. You've got to go through a very strict recruitment process where perhaps you interview 3 to 5 people. You bring them in, they visit the company, they meet the team, you check their references out, you make sure their skill set fits. So if you have a robust process, in general, 99% of the time, you'll hire someone who's good. If you're a bit sloppy, that person may leave after 3 months, 6 months, or they don't fit. So quality of the company, in my experience, relates to quality of the people. That relates to quality of the recruitment process. Also, CEOs and senior managers have to watch that their egos don't get in the way. They go, oh, I like that guy, he's just like me. He's Scottish, he's a techie guy, fantastic. You've got to hire people who are complementary to your skill sets, especially at more senior levels. Thus, that rounds out management team's ability. So I think hire complementary people, hire high quality people. The best way to do that is via a very high quality recruitment process.
I mean, I agree with that completely. I think hiring somebody into a role which doesn't suit that person and doesn't suit the company will be much, much more expensive to the company in the end than just being more careful and more diligent with the recruitment process. So I would never rush to recruit somebody and just take, so the first person looks like they might be okay. I'd make sure that the team is absolutely convinced this is the right person for that role. The other thing is also is that I agree that fundamentally everybody makes mistakes and nobody's right all the time. Yet in a startup, you can have some personalities that are quite strong, and it's a matter of learning how to listen to one another as well as be able to stress your point. I would say that one thing which is dramatically easier now than it was 25 years ago for me personally, I'm sure Frank you have this sort of experience too, is that I used to have to recruit people I didn't know, but now I've worked with so many different people that actually I can recruit people that I've worked with before. But it might have been somebody I worked with when they were 25 and now they're 45, but actually in that 20 years they've gained more experience, but I actually still kind of fundamentally know what it's like to work with that person, and therefore the recruitment process can be a bit more straightforward if it's somebody you've already worked with before, so you know how they work. But at the same time, diligent process I think is pretty key. And I think when you're younger and you haven't had a lot of people work with you before, then you do have to find a way of deciding that. I would say actually the area which is the most difficult to recruit people in a way which from my point of view, Frank, has been reliable is actually salespeople, because salespeople, the most successful salespeople I know appear to have quite different kind of personalities. The most successful salespeople don't always work with the same formula of how to be a salesperson, and therefore sometimes you can feel this person seems like they might be quite good, but then when they start going, they for some reason aren't successful in a way that was a little bit unpredictable through the recruitment process. So it could well be other people are much better at recruiting salespeople than I am, but I know it's the area where we struggle the most. The other thing is also recruiting senior managers. The reason I say this is because when you have a CV of somebody who has been very successful as a senior manager somewhere else and they've done well through the interview process, the feeling would be, okay, well, this person will do well here. But there's a certain problem with senior managers is that they think they know how to work already. I'm not saying they don't, but they have been successful in a certain way of working before. And there can be a graft versus host rejection that takes place because they can't get the whole company they're coming into that might have 30, 50, 100 people in it to work the way they're used to. And therefore they have to adapt themselves to the organization, which is actually quite difficult for somebody who's quite experienced already, because they already think they know how to do things. And they want the team to change to what they perceive as the effective way of working. But actually that doesn't necessarily work, because if you've got 20 people working for you and they just don't do that, they just don't work that way, it can be rejected in that the staff just don't listen to the manager or don't quite understand how to behave with the manager. So I think recruiting senior managers is, from my point of view, difficult once a company's already got a certain momentum of how it's working, which comes back to the point about process. And I think business process is important to a point. If you've got too much process, then you can end up going wrong just because people follow the process, and then it might be the wrong thing to do, but the process says do it, so you do it. If you've got no process, you end up with chaos, and you need some balance between the two worlds without it being chaotic or so orderly you don't achieve very good efficacy. There's quite a number of subjects I was mentioning there, but anyway.
I can add 2 points to that. We also did struggle with salespeople because they're not very loyal, I hate to say, because if they're working for you and you're giving a certain commission rate and a competitor's giving a higher commission rate, within a month or two, they're off, So what we try to do is we try to hire salespeople who are motivated, perhaps, not only commission will go on, I like the company, I like the technology, you guys give us share options, I can make a lot of money from this. You're sort of trying to lift them above just being too greedy about commission. Some big companies suffer this in the States all the time. Abcam can't keep a salesperson for more than about 9 months. Now, they sell quite low-priced products. So if you're getting commission on low-priced products, it's not as much as commission on higher-priced products. Just 4% of 100K is obviously a lot more than 4% of 1,000K. So I found this out with an ex-Abcam employee. They really struggled because a third of the team is churned every year. And I think it comes down to you have to set up the right commission formula, or you have to get the right motivators to act right sort of salespeople. Also, you're quite right with senior people. What we found that as Sphere evolved, it evolved a certain type of culture, which was, you know, very team-based, open to customers, collaborative. There wasn't a lot of autocratic type stuff. When you're interviewing certain people, I sort of get the feeling that person's very fixed in their view. They think the only way to get a certain thing done is this. I could see our guys not liking that because they like to debate it first, have a discussion, there'd be a sort of pseudo consensus, then you'd roll out some new process. So as a company evolves, the culture does become more fixed. You can't articulate a culture during an interview to sort of test a person out, or you can say to them, what was the culture like in old company? Oh, well, nobody talked to each other. We all worked remotely. We did this. It's a very independent, consultancy-based organisation. We didn't bother much with teams you want. So culture does become much more important as a company matures. You have to make sure that the senior person does conform to your culture, because otherwise they don't fit. And the company won't change to suit that senior person. And more like the person actually change to suit the company.
Well, that's a lot of learning there. We have some questions from the audience today. So now I'll ask Yasin. So I will unmute. I'd like to invite Yasin to talk to our speakers, and then you can ask your questions. Can you unmute yourself and perhaps also turn on your camera? Yasin? Okay.
Yes, Yasin, did you hear that? Yasin, you've asked two questions.
Hello.
I can't hear you, Yasin. I don't know why. Still can't hear you, Yasin. Oh. I'm not sure why, Yasin, but we still can't hear you. Maybe if you disconnect the headset, or maybe the headset is somehow interfering. No, we can't hear you.
Perhaps the organiser could read out the questions on their behalf.
And perhaps you could do that because Yasin's microphone isn't working. We can start talking while we're waiting for Yasin to see if he can get his headset working.
Yes, so he got two questions. The first question is, what do you think of future of microfluidic? I mean, I think it's the question around like market landscape evolving for microfluidic products. And what do you think about that?
From my own personal point of view, I think that having been involved in this subject space for 25 years, I think that 25 years ago, it was a sort of fancy idea and nobody really knew what to make of it, but it sounded exciting. I think that now, in general terms, there are quite a lot of examples where microfluidics is a tool which has been implemented and is clearly demonstrated to be useful. So therefore, I think it's an established technology that is understood to be useful sometimes. I think that if you say, what is the future of microfluidics? I think that it's not really about microfluidics itself. It's about application spaces. So if you said, what is the future of genomic sequencing, for example, there would be an answer. If there's an answer about what is the future of single cell genomics, there might be an answer. If there was a question about what is the future of cell and gene therapy, there will be an answer that connects to microfluidics, but microfluidics will only be a fragment of the solution to the applications in that industry. It's not the total anything. I don't think microfluidics is a total anything. It's a piece of a puzzle. And therefore, I think the key thing is it's a technology which is now very well established and it has been successful in a variety of places. So therefore, it's a tool set which can be applicable in other applications as well. And people will, generally speaking, believe that possibility. There's also much more experience and awareness of what has worked and what hasn't worked, and just from a purely engineering point of view, you know, what is practical and what isn't practical, and therefore there's a higher chance of being successful if you understand how to listen to other experienced people in the space. The one thing which is the dramatic mistake constantly is academic researchers thinking that what they've got in the lab is a product, and it's usually a very, very large chasm between what's being done in an academic lab to publish a paper or two versus what you need to have in a robust industrialized product you can sell to people and will work in other people's hands. And that's a very, very large amount of work that's quite highly underappreciated by academic spin-outs. I don't know.
Yeah,
Frank,
I think it's important. I think Microfluidics has three main features which are advantageous. You've got automation, integration, miniaturization. Where we would struggle a little bit, especially in drug discovery, is it has limited throughput capacity. So Mark's quite right. You can look at a whole process through the drug discovery process and say, right, so if I'm limited with capacity, I can't really use it in manufacturing. I can't use it above certain cell numbers. So where we found it's more useful tended to be high quality research, development, or analytical type processes. So with analytics, you're taking off a small sample. It could be you've got a 50,000 litre fermenting antibodies. You take off a small volume, you test it, you test the antibody quality, you say good. So I think the applications will change. There's a lot more drug discovery money going into novel cell therapies and manipulating cells. So I see applications within that. Diagnostics is a very good market for microfluidics. Diagnostics will obviously change. There'll probably be a COVID-32, and they'll need certain COVID tests, maybe in about 7 years. So diagnostic tests will change, but it can be quite a dynamic market. So diagnostics, again, has a relatively low throughput, cost-based feature. So outside that, I think it's difficult to see where the tech will go. I think the tech is mature, but what's more interesting is where are the new application spaces emerging, and where does microfluidics truly add value to a certain new application area?
One thing which I think is related to this sort of subject space, is the question is, I was on the editorial board of Lab on a Chip for 7 years, and through the time I've been watching Lab on a Chip and also was on the editorial board, there have been, I guess, fashions of the kind of work that's being done that's been published within Lab on a Chip. What happens is that for a period of time, this subject is something that the bioengineering community are working on in a Lab on a Chip sense that was publishable within Lab on a Chip. What happens is one of two things. Either that subject turns out to not be as interesting as everybody thought and it just dies, or it becomes very interesting and becomes a whole industry of its own, like sequencing, for example. Sequencing used to be something 20 years ago that was a Lab on a Chip subject because there was no NGS. Nowadays, there's no sequencing in Lab on a Chip because sequencing is its whole own industry. So things will transition through the bioengineering microfluidics Lab on a Chip world and either just stop because it's clear there isn't any future path there, or they transition into something completely different. Like, for example, inkjet printing. I mean, inkjet printing is microfluidics in some ways, but inkjet printing isn't something the Lab on a Chip community thinks about. It's just a whole other industry. So all I'm really saying is Lab on a Chip, bioengineering and microfluidics tend to be a bit of a transitional industry while trying to find your way. And once you found your way, and this is an application that's going to whiz off somewhere, it becomes its own industry. Does that make any sense? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a good concept of transitioning industry. I'm pretty amazed that we have two Yasin. I don't know which one raised the question. Are you able to talk?
I think this is two Yasin people, but you're not both called Yasin, are you? I think.
It's the same person. Oh, he's got a twin. No, she's got a twin.
I think I can hear one of you. Did you raise the question? Do you want to ask the question directly to our speakers?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so my question was in, I guess, like approaches in closing deals. So how do you go from, let's say, a customer who's really interested in a product to then following through into basically securing a deal, depending whether, let's say, different cycles of the technology, whether it's like a technology that's basically has all the functionality versus a technology that's kind of working for that specific application, or a technology that's basically well established?
I think the answer to the question is very different. If you have what I would describe as a product, it's a done thing that has a very fixed set of specifications, capabilities, and it's manufactured in some numbers, which means that you're showing a very specific proposition to the customer, and this is what it is, and it can't do anything that they ask it to do that doesn't do this, versus a slightly more early stage product where you say, well, it is this sort of, but hey, we can add some other things if you want us to, and it's more of a co-development. So when you're saying sign deal, that sounds a bit more like a co-development. If you say get an order, that sounds like selling a product. Does that make sense, Yassine? So it's a slightly different answer, but I'd say that selling a product is quite straightforward in terms of, especially if you're selling into US markets, because US markets move the fastest. If you show a product to a group of customers in the US and in a pharma company, they've usually got the budget, unless it's going to be very, very expensive. If it's tens of thousands or $100,000, it'll be $150,000 range, $50,000 to $150,000 range. They'll be able to find the money if they're motivated enough to buy it. So therefore, you can have the conversation, you can show them what it can do. If they've got the problem and this product fits their problem, they could choose to buy it in a month. And that could be something that they will get motivated to do because they can see it will definitely help them. If you're selling something which doesn't really fit their need, they'll also tell you pretty quickly, no, I don't need that. But the US market is a market which moves very differently to the rest of the world, to be honest, because it's very speed-based. The American market and the American customers tend to behave quickly, either saying no quickly or yes quickly. If you're in Europe, anywhere in Europe, including the UK, but the UK is a little bit different, then you tend to find that there's more caution. So there's not a focus on speed. There's more of a focus on not making a mistake and saying that we want to make the right decision. So you can't push them to make the decision faster because it'll make them feel irritated. In Asia, a lot of the time you'll end up with government tenders or government procurement somehow connected to a significant proportion of business, and then you can't change the speed of that. That will go at a certain speed. So we've had salespeople in our organisation who are in the UK, and they're really kind of like irritating to the customers because they push them. The same person, we move them to America, and the customers love them, and they behave the same way. And it's just because the personality of the customers and how to behave with them is very, very variable. So I'd say that how you behave with a customer in Japan or in Germany or in America or in Italy is totally unrelated, or in India for that matter, is totally unrelated to one another. And therefore, the answer to the question of how do you close the deal is also totally different. You can't really apply the same sales method all over the world. It won't work because people's societies and the way they purchase and the way they have an attitude for risk versus spending in their buying process is very, very different. I don't know if that helps to answer the question at all, but it's different basically.
Yeah, I think if you have a fixed product, the first thing the customer will do is they'll say that looks similar to product X. The price point similar, so they don't need to argue about the price. Maybe you give them a small discount, but obviously you have a price which is similar to other products, bar your product should be a lot better. Now, if you start to get into co-development, next thing you have to do is you'll say, well, look, maybe you have to take a standard product which costs this. You have to put some R&D design time into that. If you cost up your R&D design time, now a lot of companies around the UK will use a figure of about £200,000 to £250,000 per FTE. So if someone says to me, I want to hire one of your guys for a year to design a new feature, I will say, well, that's £250,000. Now, I know for a fact that has got a 50% profit margin built in because our overheads are maybe about 110K. So you should have at your fingertips an R&D consultancy price, a product price that you can say to the person, well, look, we can do that, but it'll cost you this. Now, a person who's experienced customer will say, well, I know the product price. Now, if you say to them, my R&D consultancy price is £500,000 per person, they'll probably go, what? So they'll also have a sense of what a reasonable R&D price is. So I think if you define what those prices will be, prior to the discussion, you can have a nice, gentle, smooth discussion. You can then say to them, let's summarise this in a proposal. So if you want us to develop this, we'll document what the price is, what you get, pricing regimes. Then you've got a contract to a degree to give to them. They either give you an invoice for it, or it goes into some legal agreement, or in some cases, you know, a purchase order. In some cases, that may have to get into a tender process. But as soon as you have those figures very clear, it's much easier for the customer also to deal with you.
I think the other point relating to the subject is price. So if you are selling a product for $1, pretty much anybody on earth could possibly buy it because it's basically not very expensive. If you've got a product that costs $1 million, there are far fewer people that might be able to talk to you because they can't afford to buy $1 million product. Now, there is a sort of a supply-demand elasticity curve around pricing, but if you're selling something that costs less than $100,000, then it's a lot easier than something that costs more than $100,000. If you sell something that costs $500,000, that's quite heavy-duty sales process, whoever you're selling it to. If you're selling something for $50,000, that's quite light, wherever you're selling it. So when you're conceiving of your product, it's really good to conceive of it in a way so you can break it down into things that are value to the customer that aren't very expensive. So, I mean, Frank, I think in Sphere, you probably had the example of a very sophisticated product, but it was quite, the minimum sales value for some of those systems were quite high. So therefore, you couldn't be talking to 1,000 people at once about it.
Interestingly, what we did do is we priced the price to be just under the US R&D grant limit, which was about $500,000 at the time. So if we went to 550, you'd lose sales. If you went to 495, you can get sales. So you have to look at dynamics. A lot of users will have a consumable budget of about £10,000, £15,000. Some of them may have a capex limit of 50k. So you're right, you do have lower price products. They're much easier to sell and someone to send you a purchase order for rather than a high cost luxury capex item, which can take about 8 months to sell and define and document and stuff. So you've got to get the sort of product pricing right, and you have to get the market right. Academics may not be willing to pay $500,000 for a product, but a lot of the industry would. So again, you got to position the right product to the right sort of customer's side.
Thank you for the question and thank you for the answer. So we have the next question from Samson. So I'll invite you to speak now. Could you unmute yourself and also turn on your camera?
Hello. Firstly, thanks for the webinar and some very interesting commentary. I was thinking of these pitfalls and some microfluidic startups that I've known, and in particular they spending a lot of resources on promoting themselves before they have a commercial product. Is it a waste of resources or does it have benefits?
Frank, do you want to go first?
Yeah, no, I think before you have something, you have to establish a presence. So, for example, certain things are quite cheap to do. Websites are easy to do. You can enter business competitions, innovation competitions. You can network. It doesn't cost a lot, but hopefully by the end of your first year, folk will go, oh yeah, I've heard there's a new microfluidic startup company called Fluidics International. Seems interesting. Now, it might not have cottoned on that you haven't yet built your product, but they'll have a sense that you exist. Now, some of the big companies will like that. They'll also watch you to the point where the risk is lower, perhaps the product's built. But I don't see much harm of investing a little bit of your cash into building a profile, building a presence, because every company I've seen that's getting into stealth mode, has never worked. So I met a company that raised a lot of cash. They were in stealth mode for 3 years. They had MERS, by the time they had MERS, everybody else was out there. Now, the other companies may not have had as good products, but folk had heard of them, and some of their products had been bought. So they lost the opportunity to be first to market. So I think it's okay to not promote yourself as it, and I'm a CEO or something, but to promote the business and what you're doing and what the markets are about and how exciting the opportunity is. I think that's a good thing, to create excitement with it, and investors do.
I think that the other thing is it's a very fast changing landscape. I mean, I'm sure for some of the younger people in the room, they will think 20 years ago sounds like a long time ago. But for myself and Frank, 20 years ago doesn't seem that long. I mean, 2005 doesn't sound like a long time ago to me. And in 2005, your approach to doing things with the internet was very, very different to the way it would be now. And Facebook didn't exist yet, for example. LinkedIn sort of existed, but not in a way anybody knew how to use or used for any purpose. Twitter didn't exist at all, I don't think. Google existed, and websites existed, and that was all there was. But actually, people didn't find you from Google, so you didn't get found by Google until they already knew you existed. So therefore, there was a lot more in-person, or focus on in-person activity. So going to conferences and exhibitions and visiting people and talking to them about your company was critical in a way that it's still critical today, but at that time, there wasn't any other way to make yourself known to exist, really. I mean, you could do some PR of some kind, but PR agencies didn't really want to talk about you until you had something of great significance to show. So the reason I'm saying this is because in that 20 years, things have changed a lot. And I wouldn't be surprised if in another 20 years' time, something has changed as well. So it's a rapidly changing story. But I think as a CEO of a company, your job is to promote the company's existence. And the more you do that, the better. But I think that to start with, a lot of that comes down to networking and being externally present with people that are interested in what you're doing. So if you're selling products into the pharma industry, talking to senior leaders in the pharma industry about what you're doing and having meetings with them in person makes a big difference, which is another part of the puzzle, which is, I think, overall something I felt a bit uncomfortable with over the last, I guess, especially over the last 5 years since COVID got sort of be working remotely all the time, is in sales, if you don't visit people, you don't have as much success. And there's a certain generational challenge at the moment that a lot of the people coming into the sales environment now think that sitting down and sending some emails and some messages on LinkedIn is sales. And actually, they've kind of almost lost the spirit of the traveling salesperson in a car with the product in the boot. And I think that even today, it's dramatically different when you have somebody in person talking to you about your technology than it is to send some LinkedIn messages to a LinkedIn feed. It's simply the attention you get is different. So they might give you 5 seconds attention on LinkedIn, but they might give you an hour's attention when you're in person. And in that 1 hour, you can convey your message very strongly, where in 5 seconds, you can't convey the message at all almost. So what I'm saying is that the skills of in-person traveling and meeting people are things which are, I think, probably for me more important than the early days than spending money on marketing. I mean, I absolutely think there's a requirement to have a basic minimum of there needs to be a website and there needs to be a LinkedIn feed, simplistically. But at the same time, and there needs to be news flow. But at the same time, I think that in the early days, especially, in-person discussion is valuable. But you have to be selective with who you're promoting things to. Sam, does that answer your question at all?
It definitely does. I mean, gives me another question about promoting ones in a scientific field, say promoting products in a scientific field. Has that changed in with changing modes of communication? Is it or is it the same same sort of channels? I mean, whether it's promoting a company or promoting a commercial product, have the times changed, and what's the valuable and what's the right ways?
I can add a few points on to Mark's last one. The other good thing about networking, going to conferences, is you meet people who'll give you ideas or views. They might sit and say, "Your technology is exciting. You'd be better positioned over here." Oh, I know an investor who'd be very interested to invest in that. So if you sit at base working remotely, you don't get learnings from interacting with people. Well, one thing I have spotted, and I've talked to a lot of big companies, it has been in the last 5 or 10 years, is a lot of big companies, and even Mark's company, my own company, would invest much more in digital marketing techniques. So nowadays, I think companies will spend 30 or even 50% digital techniques, websites that capture information, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, contacting folk, electronically, putting out white papers, capturing their interest, bringing all that back. But they'll still balance that with exhibitions, face-to-face things, investor meetings, etc. Because Mark's right, if I get 2 companies approaching me on LinkedIn, I might just say, interesting. If I met those companies face-to-face, I might say, I'm quite impressed with company number 1. The guy knows what he's talking about. Product sounds fantastic. Number 2 seem to be hyping things. So there's still, you get benefits from face-to-face selling if you're good at it. So I think there's much more of a swing towards digital, electronic. Now also that's a lot cheaper than traveling to international conferences, which can cost 15,000, 20,000. But I think companies do a mixture of both.
I do think, though, that if you go to the right, if you go to an event with 10,000 people and you've got a little booth, then you might find that you actually don't talk to many people because you look like a little tiny booth in the back corner. If you go to a conference with 100 people in a very specific subject that connects to what you're doing, you might seem the same as a multi-billion-dollar company because you'll have a table the same size as a multi-billion-dollar table, and everybody at the event will talk to you because they're interested in the subject space that fits with you. So I think actually, yes, it will cost $15,000, $20,000 to go to an event. Usually, by the time you put flights and attending the event and maybe ship some equipment if you're going to show something, but it can get you a much more concrete set of leads out of it than spending the same money in marketing. But I don't think you can only do one thing or the other. You need to be spreading your money around, unfortunately, into a little bit of everything. But I do think events, exhibitions can be very valuable.
Thank you, Mark and Frank, and thank you, Samson, for the question. And thank you, everyone, to stay here because we are a little bit behind on time. It was a very nice discussion. I learned a lot. I hope it's helpful for you as well. Just one last thing before we close it off. For people who might already know or didn't know, this workshop is the first episode of our series, and we'll have more episodes. So if you appreciate it and you could share it within your network, and we'd love to invite you to the next episode. The next episode will be talking about the best engineering practice in product development. If you're interested in joining, you can just click on our poll right now. So then we'll send you the invite. And if you could also share it with your connection, it would be great. The next episode will be on February the 12th at the same time as today. Yeah. And I just want to say thank you again to our speakers who brought lots of insights to the discussion today. And we'll have a survey at the end after we log out. So please take 1 minute to help us fill it in so we can improve the workshop quality. We'll send you the recordings and all updates about future events through emails. Yeah. Thank you. And with that,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Your day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.